So this is now the second of probably what I think are going to be four readings of the Discourses on Metaphysics by Leibniz. As I mentioned last week, before reading one, which tackled sections, I think it was 1 through 12 of this 38 section discourse. This was a very important document written in I believe it was 1686. Which was right at the center of multiple fights that Leibniz was waging. Leibniz being the representative of the real Renaissance traditions that pulled Europe out of the Dark Age, with a focus on the role of the human mind and the redefinition of human beings as made in the living image of a creator, and that idea of the Renaissance, that the creator was not just this impotent God that created creation for it to run by a formula and everything was predestined to be as it was, but rather there was an idea of an active, loving, creative force operating both beyond but also within all parts of existence, and that we were made in the self-aware image of that creative force if we worked at it. It was always contingent, and that's where free will came into the whole program. As we've read in recent weeks, this caused a major geopolitical fight to occur, centered around one way of trying to organize society, which had been holding on like a parasite for a very long time. This oligarchical idea of a master-slave society with the people born into the slave class obeying certain, very constricted and limited modes of behavior and traditions and customs that were in conformity with the controllers, the social engineers who were born into master classes, or their retainers, their courtiers. So this Renaissance idea, which reactivated certain forgotten ideas of the ancient Greek period, it produced a few results, namely discoveries in every single field, including the arts, music, instrument making, as well as astronomy. There's just medicine, everything was revolutionized. But there was a counterattack to disrupt that by trying to work very hard to put science in a little cage of empiricism, to reduce the mind to the sum total of the senses. And you had certain figures who were deployed to try to advance that agenda, namely John Locke in Newton's time. Another big player was Isaac Newton, Samuel Clarke, who was the person who authored and put together much of the Principia Mathematica, first and second editions. Descartes is another figure a little bit before Leibniz, who was a very major influence on the mode of scientific reasoning and the nature of responsible philosophy. Like what type of responsible, scientific thinking should be, that everyone should adopt, which ultimately cut off the mind from the sorts of activity that people like Kepler or Leibniz utilized when they made their discoveries into the laws of the creation. So Leibniz was, even though he wasn't living in the Renaissance period as it's defined on a timeline, he was a real representative of that Pythagorean method and fought on every level. So during this period that this document was written, he was taking on John Locke in his new essays on human understanding, that the mind and the soul were not just blank slates, but that each individual was an expression of the entirety of the universe, and that good teaching was a matter of awakening the right questions so that the student could come to discover on their own the nature of what they already had within them but they were not aware of, versus the Aristotelian John Locke approach, which is the blank slate. You impress onto the blank slate of the machine student, right, the programming you want them to have. Very behavioristic. So Leibniz is doing this. He's tackling and overthrowing the entire Cartesian system. And he's making discoveries along the way. He's not just being an ivory tower philosopher. So before beginning our current reading today with section 13, which is going to get dense, I don't think we're going to get beyond section maybe 16 or 17 today. There's a lot of very meaty material in here. I think the important thing to hold in mind, and anybody can add to this to correct or either correct me or add to something if I miss something out. But I think the thing to keep in mind is that in the course of this essay, the issue of the nature of free will and duty has to be kept in mind. How do they coexist? Cause and effect. What is the nature of a responsible approach to thinking about causality? What are the different types of causality? Right, either causes that relate to substance, the intrinsic nature of things, versus effects, contingent causes. For example, I think he gave the example last week that we read of John, who might be honest. Now, John is a substance, the identity of John, but he may or may not be honest in the course of his life. Honesty is not. You wouldn't say it's a substance, and it would be more of an attribute, because if you take the honesty away from John, there's still John, right? John could become corrupt. He could lose his honesty. But if you take honesty and remove John, it's still honesty. So he's like, there's examples like that where people often mistake and they confuse the two, and it makes it very difficult for them to navigate through causality, and also the idea of God and God as cause of creation and of man. So how do we relate to an idea of God being perfect but also being reasonable? Why, right? Is God good because, or no, not even good? Is God perfect just because? And must he also be perfectly reasonable too? And if he's perfectly reasonable, does that diminish his freedom to be irrational, right? Because a tyrant could be irrational, could be whatever. A tyrant doesn't have to obey any laws of reason. He could just do whatever he wants as a human being tyrant, right? But does that also apply to God? Could God also just be a tyrant? Or would it be more perfect and more freeing to also be perfectly reasonable? And that's also something it's an age-old question, but Leibniz is really always hammering at that and revisiting that question a lot. So I think, there's other things to say. And if anybody wants to throw out something else that they remember from last week that meant something to them or has value that I didn't say, please do.
So the only thing I could think of there is the individual in this relationship to society. It seems like that's where he's going with all this. It's not so much, okay, God, there's a relationship with God, but he's carrying it further. There's a relationship of the individual's responsibility towards others. And that means society, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Exactly. Yeah, he does. Yeah. He does touch on that, and he's going to go more into that. It's true. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry to cut in. I had a quick comment, like in relation when you said that God, the idea of God, can God be a tyrant, or does he have to abide by certain pre-existing laws or patterns? Or a certain order. So you're saying that this order, this pattern is it, does it come before God and God has to somehow abide by it, or is it, you see?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. That is I think the question Leibniz wants everybody to have firmly in mind, because hold it in mind, because as we're reading, that idea is going to be again revisited, and but I would just keep in the back of your mind as you're thinking about that the idea of before and after when it comes to these transcendental states of existence. Because obviously we have the existence of like my microphone here. There was a time before which it existed, and in a million years this is going to be dust. But that's a physical thing that exists in time, in space. There's boundary conditions outside of which there is no microphone, right? There's my hand outside of the microphone. It's not the microphone, it's my hand. So that's one state of existence. But then you have this other, beyond the realm of becoming, where things are always in flux. There's this other state of existences, like honesty is an existence, or justice, or think about on another level, the square, right? There are squares, but then there's the idea of squareness, like Plato gets at, which are transcendental. You can't say there was a moment before which, it's hard to think about a moment before which there was no square, or after which squares will stop being, or outside of which there's no square, right? It's something different. So when we're talking about,
abstractions.
That's one word for it, yeah. So there,
just certain laws or certain tenets or certain principles that are unchanging, whether it was like 1,000,000 years ago or 1,000,000 years after us.
Yeah, you know, so you just want to keep that distinction in your mind when you're thinking about the idea of causality, existence, and creator. Just to have those definitions there, because often when you lose the sense of those two states of reality, it becomes more paradoxical and weird. It's less something you can approach.
Sorry, I just didn't hear that last sentence because like the connection just got off. So.
Oh, sorry. I just said just keep that distinction in mind.
Okay.
Okay. So let's do this. Let's do a screen share. All right. So let's see how far we can get. So I think did we read 13 or did we end at 12?
Oh, 12.
We ended at 12. So today we start 13. Okay. 13 is long, 14 is long, I think 15 is long. So let's do one person each. So for 13, Jerry, you want to start?
Yes, no problem.
All right.
Okay, 13. The foundations that I have laid down give rise to a big problem, which I must try to solve before moving on. I have said that the notion of an individual substance involves, once and for all, everything that can ever happen to it, and that by looking into that notion, one can see in it everything that will ever be truly sayable of the substance, just as we can see in the nature of a circle all the properties that are deducible from it. But this seems to destroy the difference between contingent and necessary truths to rule out human freedom, and to imply that all the events in the world, including our actions, are governed by an absolute fate. To this I reply that we have to distinguish what is certain from what is necessary. Everyone agrees that future contingents are assured because God foresees them, but we don't infer from this that they are necessary. You may say, but if some conclusion can be infallibly deduced from a definition or notion, it is necessary. And you contend that everything that happens to a person is already included implicitly in his nature or notion, just as a circle's properties are contained in its circle. So you are still in trouble. I shall now resolve this problem completely. To that end, I remark that there are two kinds of connection, or following from. One is absolutely necessary, and its contrary implies a contradiction. Such deduction pertains to eternal truths, such as those of geometry. The other is necessary, not absolutely, but only ex hypothesi, and so to speak, accidentally. It doesn't bring us to, it is necessary that P, but only to given Q. It follows necessarily that P. Something that is necessary only ex hypothesi is contingent in itself, and its contrary doesn't imply a contradiction. This second kind of connection is based not purely on ideas and on God's understanding alone, but also on his free decrees and on the history of the universe. Let us take an example. Since Julius Caesar will become a permanent dictator and master of the Republic and will overthrow the freedom of the Romans, these actions are comprised in his perfect or complete notion, because we are assuming that it is the nature of such a perfect notion of a subject to include everything, so that the predicate can be contained in the subject. It could be put like this: it is not because of that notion or idea that Caesar will perform the action, since that notion applies to him only because God knows everything. You may object, but his nature or form corresponds to that notion. And since God has imposed this character or nature or form on him, from then on he must necessarily act in accordance with it. I could reply to that by bringing up the case of future contingents. They have as yet no reality except in God's understanding and will. Yet since God has given them that form in advance, they will nevertheless have to correspond to it. So I could counterattack by challenging you to choose between two options, each of which you will find uncomfortable. Either one, say that future contingents are really necessary but not contingent, or two, say that God does not know them in advance. But I prefer to resolve difficulties rather than excusing them by likening them to other similar ones. And what I am about to say will throw light on both of the above problems. Applying now the distinction between different kinds of connection, I say that whatever happens in accordance with its antecedents is assured, but is not necessary. For someone to do the contrary of such an assured outcome is not impossible in itself, although it is impossible ex hypothesi, that is, impossible given what has gone before. For if you were capable of carrying through the whole demonstration proving that this subject, Caesar, is connected with this predicate, his successful power-grabbing enterprise, this would involve you in showing that Caesar's dictatorship had its foundation in his notion or nature, that a reason can be found there, in that notion or nature, why he decided to cross the Rubicon rather than stop in it, and why he won rather than lost the day in the battle at Pharsalus. You would be discovering that it was rational and therefore assured that this would happen, but not that it is necessary in itself, or that the contrary implies a contradiction. In a somewhat similar way, it is rational and assured that God will always do the best, although the idea of his doing what is less perfect implies no contradiction. What you discovered would not be something whose contrary implies a contradiction, because, as you would find, this supposed demonstration of this predicate of Caesar's is not as absolute as those of numbers or of geometry. It presupposes, you would find, the course of events that God has freely chosen, and that is founded on 1. His primary free decision, which is always to do what is most perfect, and on the basis of that, 2. His decision regarding human nature, namely that men will always, though freely, do what seems the best. Now, any truth which is founded on this sort of decision is contingent, even though it is certain, because decisions have no effect whatsoever on the possibility of things. And to repeat myself, although God is sure always to choose the best, that doesn't stop something less perfect from being and remaining possible in itself, even though it won't happen. For what makes God reject it is its imperfection, not its being impossible, which it is not. And nothing is necessary if its opposite is possible. So we are well placed to resolve these kinds of difficulties, however great they may seem, and in fact they are equally serious for everyone else who has ever dealt with this matter. All we need is to bear in mind that each such contingent proposition has reasons why it is so rather than otherwise. Or, to put the same thing in other words, that there is an a priori proof of its truth which makes it certain, and which shows that the connection of its subject with its predicate has its foundation in the nature of each, but that this proof is not a demonstration of the proposition's necessity, because those reasons for its truth are based only on the principle of contingency or of the existence of things, that is, on what is or what appears the best among a number of equally possible things. Necessary truths, on the other hand, are based on the principle of contradiction and on the possibility or impossibility of essences themselves, without any regard to the free will of God or of created things.
Yeah, a lot of these things are definitely worth revisiting and rereading. This isn't the sort of thing as we I think all come to realize that we could just read once and say, now I get it, I read it. Any thoughts or questions about this particular section? I have a thing to say or two, but I mean, yeah, if anybody has any specific thoughts that come to mind or paradoxes or problems.
No, as you said, Matt, like it's the thing is that it's such an interesting paragraph. Like I feel for these lectures you have to read them before attending and just ponder on certain ideas, because it's very loaded and that you actually bring in insightful information into this class. Like you have to have thought about it before. So
It definitely helps. Yeah. So don't stress. Like I want this to be just sort of like an enjoyable overview of a lot of concepts. Oh, Ryan, are you still there?
I am.
Okay, I see you froze. So, and I presume that people are going to, in the coming months and years in their life, reread this. So don't stress about not getting every element. But to get the gist of it, I think, this is a good first sweep. The thing I would want, I think, people to just hold on to, again, is Leibniz's emphasis on the difference between contingent and necessary truths. It's such an important dual concept that go together really in a tight way. And this idea that when you look at them, one set, contingent truths, can have an opposite and it won't really affect the nature of things, whereas the other kind, necessary truths, cannot have an opposite that will not affect the nature of the thing itself. So as an example, you could think of like most things that exist can be polarized in binary forms, right? Like darkness, what's the opposite of darkness? It's light. It's the opposite of fast, it's slow. What's the opposite of up? It's down. So things can move faster, slower, right? Like, Ryan can run faster or he can run slower, but he'll still be Ryan, right? That doesn't affect the nature of Ryan. Ryan just is running faster at this moment and then he's running slower, but Ryan is Ryan. What's the opposite of Ryan? It doesn't really work the same way, right? Ryan is Ryan. Ryan might be more virtuous this year and less virtuous last year, or the opposite. Right? There's this more and less opposites that you can move towards, but Ryan is still Ryan. And I think that's the same sort of thing where, you know, like if you start saying God is good but does evil, that creates a big paradox. Did God do evil? Is that why evil exists, because God wants it? Or does evil exist for another reason? Is there another more satisfactory reason other than God wants evil and created evil? That's why there's evil, right? Because maybe God is evil because the cause always comes through the effect. That's also something people say, right?
Yeah.
So is there maybe something else to it that we're not looking at when we're inspecting evil and its nature, that doesn't deal with God created it and that's why it's there and thus he wants it?
Yeah. Matt, I'm just going to interject with a quick idea. So when you said that the example of, let's say Ryan is running, or let's say virtue, let's say Ryan is more virtuous this year than last year. Even if you take out virtue, Ryan will remain the same, okay? Now, but what if you take the hypothesis, or if you look at it from a different perspective by saying that Ryan is Ryan because of all these attributes, because of virtue, because of whether he's slow or fast. Like if you take all of the attributes, they somehow contribute to the substance of what Ryan is, right? So even if you take out the attribute of virtue, Ryan by himself as a substance will somehow change.
What do you guys think of what Ryan just said?
Okay, go ahead.
No, okay.
What?
I would like to interject, but Bob, if you want to go first, please.
Well, I just wanted to say something while I have it on my mind here, otherwise I could lose it. Thank you, Quan. It reminds me of an early 20th century philosopher, Karl Mannheim. He wrote Ideology and Utopia. And that was more of a book on epistemology. It wasn't really so much metaphysics, but his concern was the search for truth after, of course, that epoch was post-Darwin. And all that relativity stuff came out where you had Nietzsche was saying God is dead, and you know, you had all these characters from Dostoevsky debating, you know, nihilism and everything else. But what he came up with was something he called relationalism as far as truth goes. And his concept of what was ideology and what was utopia was a little different. Right now that skips my mind. But what I can remember this relationalism was that there is an objective truth, but it's not always clear at the time because it's related to some facts, something. I mean, it could be to some particular. It's not factual truth. It's different. So it can change from time to time, just like something might appear differently in a different light. But he was saying basically that it is objective. Truth is objective, but it is relational to certain facts of the time, and you may not always be the same for every instance. So that was all I wanted to say. But it's an interesting book, and I think it's related to the subject because you get into the post-Darwinian epoch, and the whole thing of relativism that was coming up, where you have Leibniz here, who's pre-Darwin, but dealing with the source of many of those ideas.
Well, yeah, I think that as long as I've not read him per se, but I know that as long as the idea of intrinsic isness of truth actually is something he does allow, then it could be very valuable. His approach, I think what you've said strikes a chord with me. I know some people like Karl Popper have like an idea where they pay lip service to truth, but they actually don't mean it, because in their mind it's all negation. Like there's this abstract truth we could never in any way really know except by negating or proving that former theories were wrong, but we couldn't know positively any form of truth in any way. And like that's a bit of a subversion of what Leibniz is trying to get at. I don't think this guy you just mentioned, Karl Mannheim, is doing that. I think he's probably going for something more.
I didn't get the impression reading, and at the time I was reading, and I did a kind of a term paper on
Oh,
it. So it stuck in my mind, kind of thing. I haven't reread him recently. I'd have to go over it again.
Sure. As far as what Ryan was saying,
it just reminded me.
Yeah, no. As far as cool, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, for Ryan, which that was such a potent, good question, Ryan. I don't want anybody to lose that question because it's so important. Which was, just to recap, if you remove all of the attributes of Ryan, his virtues and his ability to run fast, and everything else, and you just remove them all, does that affect the nature of Ryan as an essence? Does that eliminate Ryan if you remove them all as an essence or not? And Kwan, I was curious to see your thoughts on that.
Yes, I think that Ryan asks a very fundamental question, because I think that all the philosophies of the world has light and darkness, and here there is no intention from my part to put the label good or bad on one side or either. Okay, I think that the human mind is built in such a way that those two answers would be given. And I put in my cassette. One of the two solutions is more limited than the other. It doesn't mean that the limited solution is bad by its intrinsic nature, if you want. And here is my suggestion. You have what I call and I think that when you say you talk about relationship, Bob, it's part of my answer. Okay, in our modernity, and I define modernity as the last century or the last 120 years. Okay, we tend to say that subject is the totality of his predicates. Okay, to use technical philosophical words. Okay. So that we go to the relationship thing. Okay, if we remove the virtue of Ryan, if we remove the fact of his capability to run, that he's in love with someone, that he liked to eat such things, if we remove everything that are predicates of the name we call Ryan, does the entity Ryan still exist? Okay, and it's reminds a little bit of what happened in the Middle Ages with the nominalist school, and the other school, which would put more emphasis on the substance. And here I would like to bring a classical example in Chinese philosophy. That would distinguish between what is called cause and what is called conditions of manifestation. Okay, and the classical example is the seed of a flowers or seed of a tree. Okay, let's take a tree. The seed of a big oak tree. Okay, the seed would be the cause, because without that seed, the oak tree would not exist. But the conditions of manifestations would be sunshine, would be water, would be manure, would be the care of the gardener, and so on. And so what is a necessity is the reality of that seed, and what is contingent is, will that seed receive the care of the gardener? Will there be enough sunshine during its first year of existence? Will there be enough water in its first year of existence? And the parallel is with the human soul, okay? Because the seed is an obvious image of the human soul, which for the second kind of philosophy that I would call essential or essentialist philosophy, okay? Because the first kind of philosophy, the subject is defined by all his predicates, okay? How he looks, what does he like, what is he doing? I would call the existentialist philosophies with an S, okay? And you have all kind of existentialist philosophy from the East or the West for centuries. And the second kind that I call the essentialist philosophy, and I use the image of the seed of the oak tree, is that everything is in the seed, okay? And depending of the conditions of manifestations, that seed will manifest certain qualities or defects or whatever because of the people or because of the circumstances. But the cause is the seed, and everything else are only conditions of manifestations. And I was smiling when Orion was asking his question, because that is a so old question since mankind exists, okay? And if you read all the philosophies of the world, you can categorize the answers in the existentialist school, as I named them, or the essentialist school, okay? And I will not play the hypocrite. I am from the essentialist school because Plato is one famous answer, okay? Well, the Platonist philosophy is one famous answer among others from the West or the East, from the essentialist school, meaning that all episteme, all knowledge are already in the seed or the soul of the human being, if you prefer, and all education, educare, to bring forth what is within, is to make us remember the ideas or the eternal forms inside the seed. And that's a very fun session tonight, because I would say that I have inclination to one. That's why I consider the other one not bad, but incomplete. And if someone can convince me of the reverse, I would be very happy. But it won't happen in one evening, of course, because as Matt said, that's the kind of thing that we have to think all our life.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Kwan. Like your insights are always, very, very much cherished. So thank you for that. I just have another interjection. So when you said when you were speaking about the essentialist philosophy, okay, you said that the substance is the seed. Everything emanates from the seed, since the seed is the substance.
Yes. If I accept the metaphor, you understood perfectly the metaphor.
Okay. But if the seed is the substance, aren't everything else, let's say the things that are contingent, so the wind and the thing that will fulfill its potential, don't they somehow inherently come from the seed? So the seed dictates what the environment is going to be?
Yes, but and here we have another duality, okay? And the duality is everything an emanation of the seed, spiritual and physical, or there is a complex interaction between the seed, which is fundamentally spiritual, and what in Buddhist philosophy and Chinese philosophy is called the particles of physical universe. Okay, and I would say that, I say that respectfully, it's not so important than that, because for us human beings, it's not the physical dimension that is important, it's the spiritual dimension that is important. But there's a school in Buddhism that say that depending on the karmic energy of the spiritual seeds, it will order the physical world in a certain way. If you have more positive energy, and if you have more negative energy, the universe would be uglier, okay? Because the spiritual dimension has a architectural power over the physical particles of the universe.
Yeah. I don't know if I can interject with another question, but if someone wants to ask a question, I'll just try to keep it at the back of my mind.
It's all yours, Ryan.
Okay. So my question was, you brought again another interesting idea. So when you said it's basically you're trying to attract certain elements and then you're reshaping through that. I don't know if you can call it a will, a
Yes,
positive will, or like, yeah, a will. Through that will, you're reshaping a certain architecture of the physical world.
exactly. And
But
that's what Plato called the ideas, okay? Because for him, the ideas are foundational. And the physical world, you only have imperfect copies of those ideas, which is a world by itself.
but isn't the will irrational?
But what is irrational for you?
It's irrational is like I think it's an impulse. That's the best way you could form it. It's
Exactly.
yeah, it's an impulse. You can't really put your finger on it. It's a collection. It's almost an accumulation of things through time that burst eventually through a spontaneous impulse.
Exactly. That's why I come back to the seed of cause and the conditions of manifestation, because the seed is the absolute pure awareness, and there is no the necessity is that that pure awareness is always shining. But if you don't have the conditions of manifestation for that pure awareness to be shining, it's possible that that pure awareness would not be capable to shine forth the pure reason that is intrinsic in its nature. And the irrationality would not be because the root cause is irrational, but because of contingent exterior conditions of manifestation would block the shining forth of the inner light.
You lost me here, but
Well, I can I add something to that?
Oh, sure, Matthew.
I was just thinking based on what you just said, and I really like how you're composing your thoughts. And Ryan, I like how you're composing your questions too. I think it's the fruit of some really wonderful dialogues that need to be written, or the seeds, I guess I should say. But if I guess carrying forth on this metaphor,
Matthew,
yeah,
Matthew, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that book has already been written, and it's the Gospel according to Thomas.
oh, you're such a fundamentalist. The metaphor that I was just thinking about was if you think about like a garden which these plants are growing from seeds, and if they're given the right soil and light and CO2 to break down into oxygen, then they will fulfill a function within a biosphere, which is part of a greater whole, which is more than the sum of the parts, right? But each part of it within the biosphere has a role to play. And if you don't provide that seed the necessities, the things it yearns for, because the seed has yearning, that's why it has potential that manifests, because there's yearning. But if you don't provide it the sunlight, the water, other things, it doesn't fulfill, or at least maybe it grows but doesn't fulfill as much as it could or should. Its nature to break down, again, CO2 into oxygen and carbohydrates and other things, which are part of essential processes. So in the same sense, the soul yearns for, and I mean, Leibniz in this current section, he makes the point, I forget where he said it, that we yearn for what's best. We yearn for that which is the best. We don't do what we do. We don't choose to do what we do because we think it's going to make us worse, or because it's worse than it could be. Even Plato talks about that in many of his dialogues, but Leibniz just goes out and says it. Now, it doesn't mean that you're right, and in fact, people who have adopted false or wrong philosophies, they will awaken maybe more vices than virtues. Maybe they'll suffocate their intrinsic yearnings for justice and loves of virtue. That might be suffocated, and they might instead find themselves loving vice instead, addictively, and their potential will be reduced quite a bit. And they'll find, similarly, that the role that they were made for when they were, a seed, maybe a little fetus gestating, that potential that they could have played is not fulfilling itself. They're not being governed by reasonable decisions, but their passions are being governed by vice, by their addictions. And increasingly, they're becoming more and more governed by irrationalism, or the, things that are less than what they were meant to be. But
yeah,
then,
and that's
how do we
that's what we call the conditions of manifestations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we could be more irrational in our passions, and we could be more rational and thoughtful in our passions. But what is it that determines either direction?
I would like to give an example which is much easier to understand than the soul and so on. Okay. Because we have a human brain, we have an area of Broca, an area of Wernicke in our brain. Okay, those two areas are biological potentials to learn an articulate language like Chinese or English or Iranian, whatever. That is the cause. Okay, the cause is having a human body with a human brain. Okay, but if that human person is not with a human community, but when grow up with wolves, for example, that person will never learn and articulate the human language, which is the conditions of manifestations. And the same can be reasoned with the development of the soul, or as Leibniz say, we strive for the best because we have inside us the seed to go to the best, or to be to the best, or to flower into the best. But the conditions of apparitions don't necessarily allow that flowering.
Right. We'll never be the best because we could always be better. That's a good way to put it. But the best is always there. We're yearning for it. That's what allows us to move towards it. Otherwise, we have no guide to aim at.
Exactly. Even if someone has never been in contact with human beings, it doesn't mean that he doesn't have the Broca area and the Wernicke area. It will always be there potentially. And in terms of spirituality or the soul, it's the same. Okay, a very wicked person that has never been attracted to spiritual teachings or to philosophy for different complex reasons, it doesn't mean that that person doesn't have the seed of spiritual potential that is always there.
Cool. Ryan, are you satisfied with that, or do you, I think, yeah, I'll let you answer that, but we might have to move on though to section 14.
Yeah, I think it's better to move on and maybe ponder upon what we said.
Yeah, let's meditate on that. Okay, cool. So, Eureka, do you want to read section 14?
Now that we have some
Eureka,
graphs,
could you put the camera closer to your voice, or read into it more, if that's possible?
now that we have some graphs, is that better?
Yeah.
Of what the nature of substances consists in, I should try to explain their dependence on one another and the active and passive aspect of their goings on. Well, it is very evident that created substances depend on God, who conserves them and indeed produces them continuously by a kind of emanation, just as we produce our thoughts. For God considers from every angle the general system of particular events that he has thought fit to produce in order to manifest his glory, turning it all on sides, so to speak. And as he considers all the faces of the world in all possible ways, for no aspect escapes his omniscience, each view of the universe, as though looked at from a certain viewpoint, results in a substance that expresses the universe in just that way, if God sees fit to actualize his thoughts by producing such a substance. And as God's view is always correct, so too are our perceptions. Where we go wrong is in our judgments, which are our own. I said above, and it follows from what I have said here, that each substance is like a separate world, independent of every other thing except God. So all our phenomena, all the events that occur in us, are simply consequences of our being here of our. These events maintain a certain order in conformity with our nature, or with the world that is in us, so to speak, as this enables us to set up rules which we can use to guide our conduct and which are justified by their fit with future events, so that often we can judge the future by the past without falling into error. That would give us a basis for saying that these phenomena are vertical, that they tell the truth, without bothering about whether they are external to us or whether others are aware of them too. Still, it emphatically is the case that the perceptions or expressions of all substances correspond with one another in such a way that each one, by carefully following certain principles or laws that it has conformed to, finds itself in agreement with others which do the same, as when several people agree to meet each other in some place on a certain day and succeed in doing this. For them all to express the same phenomena, their expressions don't have to be perfectly alike. It is enough that they are correlated, just as a number of spectators think they are seeing the same thing and do in fact understand each other, even though each one sees and speaks according to his point of view. Now, it is God alone from whom all individuals continuously emanate and who sees the universe not only as they do, but also completely differently from them all, who is the cause of the correspondence in their phenomena and brings it about that what is particular to one is public to all. Without that, there would be no connection between them. This gives us a basis for saying that no particular substance ever acts on or is acted on by another particular substance. The sense in which this is true is far removed from common usage, but it is good nevertheless. Bear in mind that what happens to each substance is a consequence of its idea or complete notion and of nothing else, because that idea already involves all the substances, predicates, or events, and expresses the whole universe. In reality, nothing can happen to us except thoughts and perceptions, and all our future thoughts and perceptions are only the consequences, contingent ones, of our preceding thoughts and perceptions. So if I could command a clear view of everything that is happening or appearing to me right now, I would be able to see it in everything that will ever happen or appear to me. And it would not be prevented and would still happen to me, even if everything outside of me were destroyed except for God. But when we have perceptions of a certain kind, we think that they come from outer things acting on us. And I want to look into what this belief is based on and what truth there is in it.
Okay, so perceptions and judgments, I think, is the theme here. That we can't say that if we hold to the idea that God is true and creation is thus true because it emanates from truth, then our perceptions, which are something that our senses that are created also receive, are also true. You feel what you feel, you see what you see. But where does the falseness come in? Because the paradox hits, well, our perceptions lie to us, right? Oftentimes our senses are always lying to us. But then how could they be true if they're telling us things that are not true? The plane in the sky looks really tiny, like a centimeter, but it's really big plane. That's not true. It's not a centimeter. So Leibniz resolves that, and he says it's our judgment. There's this inner power of judging the information from the senses, which is where the problem resides. And it's not this, you can't blame the senses per se. So how is it that we can know how to judge our senses better, or the information from the senses? And I was reminded of Bertrand Russell, where one of his, he's the 20th century. I've come to discover increasingly from recent studies that Bertrand Russell has really become the 20th century authority on Leibniz. He wrote the definitive book on Leibniz's philosophy in 1900, and his book on Western philosophy is like seen as authoritative. Now he hates Leibniz, and he actually says in a writing he wrote on causality that causality doesn't exist, that there's no role for the assumption of causality in proper science, because in his proof is your eye sees red differently from my eye seeing red. And if we get 5 people together looking at red, we might see it a little bit differently each. And because we all eyes might have a slightly different receptivity to the frequency of the redness, there is no such thing as truth. That's the leap he makes. So is that reasonable? Is that line of programming reasonable, or is as a proof that there is no such thing as truthfulness because senses are lying? Or is there another way of going about it? Is one question to hold in mind. Other people might have another thought or a question though that Leibniz is getting at. What do you guys, does anybody have anything that was sparked from this section or regarding what I just said?
Yeah. I have a question in regards to macro and micro. So just the idea of within the macro lies. So one is the reflection of another, you see? I really didn't. I didn't really have a full grasp of that idea. If someone can just enlighten me on it.
Are you referring to something specifically that we read?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yes, and I believe once again that he's right. Brian, congratulations. You know how to ask the specific good questions.
Thank you.
Because if I may, and if some heretical rapprochement is allowed, there's a paragraph in this that is incredible, and I think it's related to what Brian just said.
Can you specify where that is?
Yes, wow, it's maybe page 9, and it start at now it is God alone. If you can find it, it's very close to the end of the section. Page 9.
Could you read it? Oh,
Yeah.
Could you read that?
Yeah, sure. Now it is God alone, from whom all individuals continuously emanate, and who sees the universe not only as they do, but also completely differently from them all, who is the cause of this correspondence in their phenomena, and brings it about that what is particular to one is public to all. Without that, there would be no connection between them. That gives us a basis for saying that no particular substance ever acts on by another particular substance. Okay? And now I would like to make the heretical rapprochement in philosophy, okay? Because the 6 or 7 lines I just read, and this is the first time in my life, okay, that I read that thing from Leibniz, okay? But believe me or not, it's exactly the Avatam Satya Sutra from Buddhism that says that each of our soul is compared to a diamond or a pearl, and that all the universe is a network of diamonds or of pearl, and each diamond or each pearl being an individual soul and connected to the center diamond, which is God, if you want. Okay, so in Leibnizian language, okay, and you can check by going on internet to Avatam Sakya Sutra, Avatamsaka Sutra, and you will find exactly what I just said. And once again, it's the difference between cause, okay, that spiritual source, and the phenomena, and how it can be perceived. But once again, I read the 3 lines. Now it is God alone, from whom all individuals continuously emanate. Okay, so the individual pearls or diamonds are from. Now it is God alone, from whom all individuals continuously emanate, and who sees the universe not only as they do, but also completely differently from them all. Okay, so you have the connection to the central source, but at the same time, you are an individual with its specification and with its with his special outlook on the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have, because the thing is that what you just said, and this idea of having individual substances that somehow are integrated into the whole, but at the same time apart. It really reminded me, because a few years back I read Leibniz monadology. So it's basically the same idea. So he's trying to explain what those, he calls them monads, monad.
Exactly.
So each
Monads, exactly.
Yeah, each monad is a substance in of itself. Now, it's been a long time since I read that text. I really need to refresh my memory. But yeah, it's just to bring it. So this really reminds me of that the text I read like a few years ago. So
I like the idea And for anybody listening online right now, it's often taught, and I know I was even encouraged to read the monadology in university without ever reading anything prior to that. Now, the monadology was written at the very end of Leibniz's life as sort of the condensation, the concentrate of Leibniz's thinking. But to read that without having been encouraged to read the Discourses on Metaphysics is just such a shame, because this is really, you're going to be getting, Ryan, and I think this is resonating with you really nicely. All of the essentials in the monadology are contained in this document, but laid out in more exposition, and in other writings too. Like, my God, Leibniz wrote so much. One thing that occurred to me is this idea. Many of the thinking from a geopolitical standpoint today, many of the social engineers, if you might want to call them that, who are trying to manipulate society, are often, they're possessed by this idea that they can create and shape society around a certain model that they have of what we should be. Things like MK Ultra that came out of the CIA programs of the 50s and 60s and 70s were an example of that, right? But there's an idea that Leibniz is getting at, that any substance can't itself be the cause of changing any other substance, that it's our contingent attributes which are what induces the change, any more than like a square could cause a triangle to change from a triangle. A triangle is a triangle, a square is a square, a circle is a circle. So an identity, somebody like, Ryan or Quan or Eureka, we are identities, and Eureka is not going to be the cause of the change of Quan, or inversely, it's going to be Quan's virtues or Eureka's virtues that will be what you might say induces changes. But if the change happens, it's not going to be because of Eureka changing Quan or Quan changing Eureka. It's going to be because of Eureka changing Eureka because of certain qualities of judgment that Eureka has, or certain qualities of judgment that Quan has.
Yes, and I would like to say also that because we are all interconnected, and especially that we are connected to the central source of light, the contingency precisely is what happened that we are at a certain distance of the source of light rather than close to the source of light. Okay, when we say that everyone is interconnected and connected to the central source. Okay, I say source, but it's obvious that in Leibniz language it's God. Okay, so that the cause is that God is a cause, and the fact that the soul, which once again now it is God alone, from whom all individuals continuously emanate. Let's say that individual means individual souls. Okay, those are the basic causes or the foundations. And something happened in the history of the universe or in our personal history that will make us less capable to be in the image of that source, if you want. Okay, and those are precisely the famous conditions of manifestations.
Yeah. But I think from what you just said, the big question that comes out is what is the cause of this corruption?
Okay, then we enter in the world of theology. Okay, you probably know the word theodicea. Theodicea, theos, God, and dikaia in Greek, justice. Okay, the justice of God. Why a certain person are handsome? Why certain person are ugly? Why certain person are capable? Why some are stupid? Why some are born in rich families and other in average families and other in poor families? All religions under different disguises would say that there is a kind of sin that would make you far away from the source. Okay, but I would like to reason in terms of consciousness. Okay, if you would have to invent some story to explain why there were some defect, like why a child is born with a cancer, for example. Okay, after all, that child didn't do anything. Okay, it's not if you were born perfect as a human being and you make some stupid things at 20 years old and you pay for that later. That kind of thing we can understand. But if a child is born with a cancer, normally the child didn't do anything. So we fall, okay, in inverted comma, into what I call mysteries, and many religions would give you stories to explain that, like karma and so on. And I don't want to enter in that because I prefer to say, from our standpoint of adult human beings, it's better to maybe to reason in the fact now that we can have a conscious mind. Do we make everything that is possible to be closer to the source, or to use the Christian terminology, to God? Okay, because if you go beyond that, you would be forced to use history or stories that have been invented by the priest to give some consolation, in my understanding.
But so getting closer to the source, so is that purely a judgmental, working on the quality of your judgment?
Yes, well, the source, okay, is pure awareness, is, okay, let's take an adult person, okay? Most of the time we have to take decisions in our life. And the more you are aware of reality, of your inner reality and of the external reality of the community in which you are, the local community, the provincial community, the national community, the continental community, the planet community, and so on, the more you're aware of all those factors, the more your decision will be closer to a perfect decision, even if there's no perfect decision coming from a human mind, but closer to the perfection, if you want.
I think some of this stuff, in terms of the art of judgment, which is otherwise known as wisdom, right? The art of wisdom, or the cultivation of wisdom, comes through education in a large way. But then not all educations or definitions of education are equal either. So I think what Leibniz is getting at is also, he's talking to future teachers and saying, like, look, if you're going to be a teacher, being a channel for the continuity of the best of civilization into the future, which is what teachers should be, and not just simply trying to create little cogs in a machine, right, to go out of their university and into becoming parts of a machine that may or may not be just, then there's certain concepts that you might want to hold in your mind to cultivate that wisdom, both in yourself, but also in your students. So the idea of going back to Plato, who focused, if you look at in the Republic or many of Plato's works, he always made the point that a philosopher should never get into dialectic before going through a rigorous training in geometry and in astronomy. He did that for a reason. It wasn't just to try to like sound cool. He was basically saying that in the practice of doing constructive geometry and in learning astronomy, that you learn something about the macro and the micro, right? The universals outside of yourself that are actually within yourself, which you only discover by making discoveries, not by memorizing formulas. You see, the formulas are an effect of a discovery, not the other way around. So then he says you could go into, after being training yourself as a student, then you can go and graduate into philosophy and start moralizing in metaphysics and justice. In our society, we tend to just skip those steps and we go straight into philosophy. Or if we do those steps, then a lot of math students and science students, they don't even get proper philosophy. They just memorize a bunch of formulas. So you can see why people get all messed up. But
yes. Oh, sorry. Go, Gerard.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just going to interject here. I think, Matt, there is something a bit, because your premise is basically saying that knowledge, the more knowledge you get of geometry, or the more insight you get of the subject, the more aware you will be of let's say of certain universal principles, and thus you will become, your judgments will become better, and then you will become more good, if you could say that. But at the same time, there's a big flaw in that, because the thing is that, I mean, there are many people who are very intelligent, whether it's Bertrand Russell or even Hobbes. You mean, they're all very in terms of pure intellect, they can decipher, like they had, it's not the fact that they have a lack of reason that they couldn't understand geometry. I think it's something else. I think it's more an aesthetic appeal. It takes me back maybe to the letters on aesthetics by Schiller, knowing how to that your emotions have to be educated. It's not as much reason as much as educating your emotions, I feel.
Yes,
Well,
but
I
I would
agree.
like
Yeah, Kwan, go for it. Yeah.
you are perfectly right, Ryan. But you have two fundamental emotions, which are fear and joy. Okay, and I don't mention anger because anger is another aspect of fear. Okay, so fear, anger is the same emotion, and you have the emotion of joy. Uh, if and when Matt say that if you truly go through the pathway, but really by yourself and not by memories and not memorizing things, okay, but that you discover the laws of arithmetic and geometry, you discover by yourself the structure of your internal and external universe, and that discovery produce in yourself the emotion called run by Confucius, or agape by Mike Billington when he translated Confucius, which is called deep joy related to discovery or creativity. I propose enthusiasm in English because it means God or the divine within. And that enthusiasm is the pure joy. Okay, so you have joy and anger, fear. Okay, but once again, it's the same emotion. If you learn to cultivate that joy, there's an asymmetry between joy, enthusiasm, and anger, fear. And when you have a true education, meaning that when you learn to educare, to bring forth what is within that source of pure joy, of enthusiasm, it's precisely what you said, Ryan. It's a question of how you deal with your emotions, okay? If you did not meet a good master, a good teacher, or your parents, okay, because most of us, our parents, are our first master or teachers, who show you how to be in contact with that pure source of pure joy, the events in life, in ordinary relations, would rather nourish the fear, anger side. So you're right, it's a question of emotion rather than reason. But once again, what do you mean by reason? Reason is not intellect, okay? Reason with a capital R. Okay, I would use Latin here. Rationality is not reason, okay? Because rationality comes from Latin ratio, meaning how to measure, okay? And reason is pure awareness. So if you were truly in the path of true education, educare, from your childhood, you learn how to be in contact with that source of pure joy. And because of that, you would not be too much bothered by the fear, anger side of emotions. And because of that asymmetry, someone who live his life guided by enthusiasm and that agape, that run, that pure joy, he doesn't see the inner reality and the outer reality the same way that the person living in the fear, anger universe. Okay, so I explained with many sentences what you said. It's a question of how to deal with your emotions.
It's
Precisely.
very insightful, because what I'm trying to get at is that there are certain, also within Christianity, when they put passion as coming before reason, so that passion, or you have faith in something that you do not know, you see, but
Exactly.
that faith in of itself is enough to get you linked somehow with that source.
Yes. Well, I would take the risk to say that faith is a first step, okay? Because in Christianity, if you read the authors, faith is the first step, but they invite every Christian to walk the pathway of reason with a capital R,
Yeah.
okay? So yes, it's like a child, okay? He would have to, it's exactly what happened with our parents, okay? When we were young, we believed them because they are bigger, they are more powerful, and they seems like God-like figures for us, okay? So we had faith in them, we had confidence in them, okay? Another word for faith is confidence. But that confidence, if it's not combined with an education, educare, okay, bring forth what is within, events of life will give you anger and fear, and you will lose that initial faith if that initial faith is not made stronger by the pathway of reason, of pure awareness, of education in the true sense of education.
Let's, on that note, let's read, Jerry had proposed we read a new translation that he just discovered of the Phaedo after we get through this, on the immortality of the soul and Plato's approach to it. But he does develop what you just said in a very interesting way regarding the approach of a healthy idea of education. Like I'm when I say that, I mean the sort of type of approach that Bertrand Russell did not get to receive when he was in Cambridge, versus the sort that Plato aspires to provide, that he was luckily able to achieve from Socrates before he died. So yeah, let's do that next. And for tonight, since we're already at 9:30, let's see if we can get to section 17, or read maybe, let's try to get to 18. There's smaller sections now. And then we could just open up for, casual dialogue, discourse. So 15 and 16 are smaller. Let's get another reader who has not read yet. Bob, you want to read?
Okay.
All right.
Let's see. I needn't spend long on this. All I need just now, all I need just now is to reconcile what is said as a matter of metaphysics with what is said in everyday talk, which I do by saying that we rightly or reasonably attribute to ourselves the phenomena that we express more perfectly, and attribute to other substances what each expresses best. So a substance that expresses everything, as every substance does, and is in the metaphorical sense infinitely extended, comes to be limited by the more or less perfect manner of its expression. This gives us a notion of how substances obstruct or limit one another, and consequently we can say that in this sense they act on one another and are obliged to adjust themselves to one another, so to speak. What follows is the reason why this way of speaking, though not correct as a matter of strict and basic metaphysics, is nevertheless reasonable or right in its own way. It can happen that a change that raises the level of expression of one substance lowers that of another. Now, a particular substance has power in expressing well the glory of God, and in doing that, it is less limited. And each thing, when it exercises its power, that is to say, when it is active, changes for the better and extends itself in proportion to how active it is. So when a change occurs that affects several substances, and actually all changes touch them all, I believe we can properly say that one that immediately passes to a higher level of perfection or to a more perfect expression exercises its power and acts, and one that passes to a lower level shows its weakness and is acted on. I hold also that every action of a substance that has perception signifies some pleasure, whereas every passivity, every instance of being acted on involves some sadness, and vice versa. It can easily happen, though, that a present advantage is destroyed by a greater evil later on, which is why we can sin when we are active or exerting our power and enjoying doing so.
That very much reminded me of so much of what has been said, and I think that you always know you're reading something which is rich in substance when you have a discussion of something based on, you stop and have a discussion in mid-reading, and then you go on reading and you discover that the author was developing on what you had just been talking about. So your minds are all in harmony. And this idea that we're partaking more or less in the essence of being, of the creator, of God, of whatever you want to call it, which is at the heart of our improvement or deterioration as beings in life, rather than us having a lack of our attributes, as far as like assuming that our being is the sum total of our attributes, which is what you were saying, I think, is the existentialist school versus the essentialist school. Whereas the essentialist school would be it's the idea that we partake more or less in degrees of qualities of existence that allow us to say that, oh, that's why we are more perfect or less perfect, or more acted upon. So I just thought that thought just came to mind a little bit.
Yeah. And I would like to add the word participation, okay? Because in Plato, he said that if you have to give the answer in one word, you have to participate to the glory of God, if you want, even if Plato did not say it that in that way, okay? But because God, for him in the Republic, he would call that the Son of the Absolute, okay? Absolutus being the Latin word for complete. So I suppose that the Son of the Absolute is Plato words for God. So he said that if you want to be happy as a human being, you have to participate to the glory of the Son of the Absolute, of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's we were talking before we began reading about Bertrand Russell's Scientific Outlook book from 1930, where he talks about his idea of the purpose of of education, and how there should be one education for the elite with one set of parameters, and one education for those who will be ruled over with another set of goals and parameters. And he says in it that for those who will be considered the rulers, their education has to focus on initiative, creativity, boldness, to the degree that they remain respectful and devoted to their caste. And for those who will be ruled over, their education must be focused on awakening attributes of compliance, contentedness. And he also says in another place that in his future idealized world that people will have, the masses will have convictions, but they won't know who put them there. They won't know where the convictions came from, and they won't want to know. And that's the like healthy society he dreams about. And I was just wondering why, like today in Quebec, like there's so much antidepressants, right? Like so many people are depressed. It's just wild because everybody's natural.
They got a pill for it.
What's that?
And they got a pill for it.
And they got a pill for everything. Yeah. And you're like, well, why is everyone depressed and on pills? And it's like, well, because our natural sovereign needs are not being met. We're all being, conditioned to be in a state, like Leibniz even just says it, that we're going to be, I don't think he used the word depressed or something, but he says something on that degree, on that line, that if you can't express that, you will be sadder. You will not access that happiness that you yearn for.
But at the same time, I think that the oligarchs are a little bit suicidal too. Okay?
Yeah.
Because when they create that cage for their lower fellow beings, human beings, okay, they don't participate to the Son of the Absolute. They don't participate to the glory of God. Doing that, they go on a satanic path, meaning a path that it's the opposite to the pathway, to the participation.
They're basically unhappy people, right?
Exactly. Because they maybe have the impression that they are in a domination position, but they are deluded, because by doing bad things and by dominating people under them, they deprive themselves of that pathway to the participation to the glory of God, or the glory of the Son of the Absolute.
But I somehow I don't really share in this vista of having I just feel that the current age we live in is an age dictated by the philosophies that emerged in the 60s and 70s. A philosophy based on a new reading of Marxism, a philosophy that was pushed to the fore after the horrors of World War I, World War II. After also, I feel like the West had somehow exhausted itself intellectually, morally, and somehow this whole value, it was a value system shift. So the only way to advance was to completely flip everything on its head, to say that everything that we thought to be right is wrong. So this is the way I view it, I perceive it, and from the 60s, 70s onward, everyone, whether it would be the rich people, what you would call oligarchs, basically people who are holding the power of society, or whether it's the layman, we're all part of the same culture.
There are people who are still part of the classical culture. They are not in the majority, of course, but I would like to say that that the culture of despair that you give the origin after the First World War, I think that the Venetian oligarchy in the 16th, 17th century with Paolo Sarpi already created the seeds for that oligarchical culture to manifest itself, and we can push it as far as the Babylonian priesthood or the Roman families who founded Venice in the 8th century.
Interesting. Do you mind just the names? Paolo Sarpi, Venice?
Yes, he was born in 1552, I think, and he died in 1623.
Okay.
So you would admit that it's 4 centuries before World War I.
Yeah, and you also mentioned. Yeah, you mentioned the Babylonians. It's an interesting
Yeah.
perspective. I'll have to look into it.
Yeah, I would say that maybe I think that your name is Iranian. Am I mistaken?
Myself, no, I'm originally from Lebanon.
Okay, because Hamadi, it sounded a bit Iranian for me. Do your ancestors come from Iran?
It's a bit because my father is originally from Lebanon. My mother is, so she's from India, but her roots are from the her
Okay,
roots are from the Ismaili tradition, which are
okay.
found in Iran.
Are you family
So,
part?
and my
Are you
father,
family Pax? Are you family Paxi?
uh, no, not really. Like it's so my father is from Lebanon. My mother is from India, but both of them share the same somehow religious. I don't know. Like it comes from the same root or something.
Okay,
Uh, so yeah, I'm not too
okay.
too
No,
too.
I
But
say
yeah.
that because you know that the old Iranian religion is Arima as Ahura Mazda and Ariman. Okay, the eternal fight between good and bad, or light and darkness, or if you want, on the political dimension between the oligarchical system and the creative system. Okay,
Mm,
that's only why I mentioned that. And
yeah. No, Iran.
I want to ask
Iran.
Ryan why he thinks the 60s and the 70s were such uh, the roots of such a bad culture. It seemed to me that the 60s there was hope. And why not the 80s and the 90s, I would think would be more.
When I allude to the 60s and 70s, I'm alluding to the counterculture. So just basically the baby boomer generation that adopted a lot of the ideas that were built by uh, Hockenheimer, Adorno, so the Frankfurt School thinkers, which were really, so it's just this notion, these ideas, and who put them to the fore are the baby boomer generations. They were the momentum that really pushed it into the institutions and made it a status quo. Yeah.
well, Ryan, I would like to say that these people, you are perfectly right by naming these people as being the immediate ancestors of the pessimist control life nowadays, but they are not the creator of that mentality. They are only the very modest inheritors of the oligarchical mentality and of the dialectics between the Apollonian dimension and the Dionysian dimensions. Okay, and that's precisely the trap, that if you don't have enough enthusiasm, you wouldn't be in that. You will be always between pain and pleasure, which is the core of the oligarchical model.
Mm. Um,
Can I just add one thing that there were many other classical or people within the classical tradition in the 1960s as well. It's not like there was this overall conversion of society into countercultural ethics in the 1960s across the elite and the masses. But there were a lot of representatives of the classical traditions, but unfortunately they took the name, not unfortunately, I mean, they were represented. If you read the speeches or listen to the speeches of Martin Luther King Jr., that's somebody who's firmly within this Leibnizian Platonic tradition. All of his speeches, all of his writings reflect this same thing that we're reading today with Leibniz, or you read with Plato. Same thing for Bobby Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, all had sensitivity to many of the dynamics that we're reading about, and many others too. Many of them weren't killed, but many of them were who achieved influential positions that could shape or uplift the culture. Were actually artificially intervened upon and wiped out, either through coup d'etats or assassination and cover-up. So I mean, there was this. It wasn't just an organic just change from culture to counterculture. That it happened through a lot of unnatural intervention. I think that's important to investigate and keep that whole dynamic in mind when looking at the evolution of philosophy and cultural dynamics from one generation to the next, especially around that 1960s period.
Well, also the 50s were, you know, kind of deserved a counterculture. Well, I think, of course, I go back that far, you know, right, and beyond. And so I get defensive about the 60s, Ryan. All right. But yeah, the way I see it, people started to question some of those basic dogma, which was the 50s. The 50s were basically ruled by Alan Dulles and his people, and there was hope in the 60s. Why I questioned our friend Ryan here on that specific. But you're another generation, so I mean, you all are probably another generation. So it's you perceive it differently.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, the thing is to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? To both be revolutionary and also to, I mean, Alan Dulles and J. Edgar Hoover and all of those nasties definitely tried to pass themselves off as representatives for civilization, and that was rightfully rejected by people who were disgusted by their evil, and that was good. But at the same time, it's you don't want to. I think a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people, some made the mistake of sort of. It's what always happens, right? When you see something you thought was good acting badly, you tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say all of that thing was bad, and you miss out on what was good about Western civilization and say, no, it's all dead white European males being hypocrites or something. So again, not everybody did that, but a lot of people did, and it resulted in some confused, you know.
Well, I would say that the white males in the 19th century were more efficient than the non-white males, okay? Because that kind of oligarchical tendencies exist also in China, okay? And if the Chinese oligarchs were more efficient than the Western oligarchs, we would have the Chinese male instead of the bad white males, okay? So one thing that is important, that oligarchical tendency is universal.
Yeah.
Okay. Why do we have the bad white males nowadays rather than the Asian bad males? Because the white males have been more efficient in organizing violence in the last 2-3 centuries than the other males from other cultures, which is an accident of history. It could have been the reverse.
It could have been the reverse. That's a good point.
But then what do you think of the idea that there was an certain that what had happened and the current culture that we got for the past 5 decades, that it somehow couldn't be stopped because there was a natural flux to history. There was a natural flow that eventually dictated that such a reversal of values is inevitable.
A reversal in the sense of destruction, or reversal in the sense of return to the classical tradition?
No, reversal in terms of destruction, in terms of reversing tradition. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's very easy for me to answer your question, because the long pathway to reason and beauty is precisely a very long pathway, in the sense that since that we humans being, we have reason at a certain level, not complete developed reason, all human history, universal history, is the history of the development of the human mind and of the adventure to reach pure consciousness. Okay, our written history is not so long. Okay, if we count from the old Egyptians, it's about 5,000 years. It's not so long. Okay, so I think that we should give a chance to our species.
Yeah, but just to go back to the, for example, when I said a natural flux to, or just a natural evolution to history, so well, if you just condense it very quickly, say, let's say the 18th century, or 17th century, starting with Baroque, ending with Bach, then going from Mozart, then evolving to Beethoven. Beethoven alongside with Kant, so they were very much they were trying to integrate the emotional realm, trying to critique reason, and say that there is more than reason. Reason is not doesn't dictate everything. So enter the 19th century, and the 19th century where the heroic individual arises, the willful individual arises. Then, and the 19th century takes you into the individual. The individual becomes king. Then 20th century is where individual is taken beyond the realm of values. Values still existed in the 19th century. 20th century was the death of values. That's the way I see it.
Well, I think that you're right, but at the same time, I am absolutely sure that you understand everything you said. But at the same time, it's a certain construction of history that has been proposed to us. You're younger than me, but I'm not so old either. So we got you were educated in the West, I think, like me.
And I was so born in Canada, lived here a few years, then had to move to Saudi, and in Saudi, that's where I got my. So I was in a French school, like lycée
Okay.
français. Yeah.
So if you were at Lycée Français, you were educated according to the curriculum of the Western world, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. So we have more or less the same education, even if I'm older. What you just said, and I'm absolutely sure that you understood everything you said, is a construction of history that has been fed to us. But if you know more history, it's not necessarily that line that is the reality. And I would like to suggest another line of reality. Okay, what happens between Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Stravinsky, and let's say Gershwin, okay, to take the musical line, it's not that there are new values that appear, but the transmission of the right hierarchy of values has been dismantled, okay? And when you said that people discover or learn to discover that there is not only reason, but also emotions, it's not true. Because when you are going on the journey of discovery, you have that pure joy of agape, and that pure joy of agape is something emotional, okay, which appear at the same time than the reasoning process. So it's not that people discover that it's better to be on the emotional mode versus the reasoning mode with a capital R, but I would like to propose a line of interpretation which is not the same than what has been fed to us and that you repeat perfectly. And I want you to know that I don't think that you are just a parrot, but that you understand that perfectly. But even if that you understand that perfectly, it has been fed to you as it has been fed to me, okay? Or to Matthew, even if he's younger than me, and Matthew and you probably are of the same age. But the line of transmission that I would like to propose is that between Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Stravinsky, and Gershwin, people forgot the way to nourish agape, okay? That superior emotion, deep joy related with creativity, discovery, and understanding. Understanding of ourselves, of course, of others, and of the universe. So emotions is something that is promoted in classical education, but not the low kind of emotion, but the superior emotions of agape, of deep joy related to understanding, creativity, and discovery, and not the emotions of fleeting pleasure, because fleeting pleasure is always associated with fear and anger. So the people of the 20th century did not discover the value of emotion. They simply forgot the upper scale of the emotional dimension.
You mentioned
also the that line of the centuries dividing things. It goes up really the first 15 years of the 20th century were really an extension of the 19th century, in my mind anyway. The war changed everything. The war changed people's attitudes, the way they thought, the way they dressed, a lot of things. But before that, I think if I understand where you're going, with the 19th century, I think we have a cultural ideal there because we saw a very civilized society developing in most places. And then the war happened and everything changed.
I just had I had a quick comment on what you said, Juan. So there was something very interesting you said, which was there was a lineage between Bach and
Mozart?
Bach, Beethoven, and let's say Stravinsky in the 20th century, but there was a degradation in the hierarchy of values. Can you expound on that?
Yes. Yes. Do you remember the movie by Roman Polanski when you have the movie Mozart, precisely, okay? Mozart was speaking with the Emperor George II, and he was proposing a line of music, and the Emperor was not too happy because there were no classical characters on that. And Mozart answered, but I don't want those classical characters because they shit marble. I don't know if you remember that line, because they shit marble. Okay, I'm sure that it did. I'm sure that it did not correspond to the true Mozart. Okay, it's an 20th century Roman Polanski interpretation of Mozart. And when I say a degradation of values, it's exactly like that. I'm not against the ordinary pleasure, eating with friends, drinking wines, having ordinary jokes and so on. But there is a hierarchy of values. And if you don't learn to be educare, to bring forth what is within, if you don't learn to be in contact with the superior emotion of agape, because of events in your life, you will have more fear and anger, okay? Because that balance between the oligarchical fear and anger equilibrium and the pure joy coming from agape enthusiasm run, if you don't learn to develop that side, you wouldn't have a degenerate life and a degenerate civilization, okay? Because a civilization is formed by every people in that culture, okay? And if more than 45, 50% of the people are anxious, angry, and degenerate, that civilization will degenerate. And that's precisely that hierarchy of culture that has been lost somewhere between the 18th, 19th century And understand me well, the oligarchical interpretation of reality existed since the Babylonian priesthood and maybe before. So the two were always present, but I would say that there has been a accelerated degradation of the classical values, maybe since the last 3 or 4 centuries, and maybe because of the excellent maneuvers by Venice, as we discussed in the paper by Michael Kirsch. I would say that there is an acceleration of degradation since the last 3, 4 centuries, maybe because of the oligarchical maneuvers of Venice. And from Venice, it went to Amsterdam. From Amsterdam, it went to London. And from London, it went to New York, but London is still important now.
Is there a book that you could reference to just understand this lineage of this philosophy that originates from Babylon, goes to Venice, Amsterdam, just as this frame of thoughts?
Well, read the article by Michael Kirch. I suggest Matthew to send the article to you, and read that first. But the book that I suggest you don't read it before reading the article, okay? Because the book is called, since you went to Lycée Français, you speak and read French, of course. And the book is in French because it has been written by Jacques Attali. You know Jacques Attali?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so the book is Les Juifs, le monde et l'argent. It has been written in 2003 or 2004, okay? You will have many technical and historical details in that book, and it's 600 or 700 pages in pocketbook. But please, I know you're a clever person, Ryan, but please read the article before you read the book.
Yeah. And not that clever. I'm always struggling, but but yeah, doing our best. What I wanted to there's this question in my mind. So because the thing is that when you say so your frame of reference, the way you see things is that you're basically saying that there is a medium by which you have to foster somehow. I don't know how to frame it. It's actually hard to frame it, but
there's a line of interpretation that we have all been brainwashed into.
I know.
Okay,
I know, but the thing is that there's something else. Like the thing is that because the way you're explaining it is that there is a certain hierarchy of value. There's a value system that you have to maintain, and that this hierarchy system of value is the one that would allow you to nourish continually this agape that we have inherently in us.
Yes, exactly.
It is through such a continual nourishment that you prosper. Now,
exact. Because having a physical body, fear and anger are biological, intrinsic component of our nature. Okay, and if you don't learn to develop agape through education, a true education,
yeah,
you wouldn't be a biological unit. And a biological unit is called an animal and a beast.
But there's something for some as I wanted to like the way you it doesn't really explain certain events in history where you see metamorphosis, like where you
metamorphosis,
see,
yes.
Yeah, because metamorphosis is more when you push something to its limits. You have something else completely different that a completely different outpour that comes out of it. You see?
Yes, but that's the philosophy of creative destruction. Okay, my hypothesis is that the destruction can be done by chaos, but creativity is not done by chaos. It's done by a superior understanding of the reality.
Mm.
You know, that's precisely what we have been spoon-fed and brainwashed, that Apollonian and Dionysian interaction. Okay,
Yeah.
And believe me, I read Michel Foucault. I read, and he since you read French, Michel Foucault, when you read him, it's simply dazzling. Okay, if there's a French guy that knows how to write French, is Michel Foucault. Okay, but he's the archetypical example of someone capable to write like a god, but not transmitting divine values.
Mm. And I have never, like, 20th century French writers, I've never really gotten into them because I'm like you, like I always had this this yearning for the Platonic, Socratic, Christian, those ideals. Like I had always a sensitivity towards that. So I always, that's where my readings deviated towards.
Well, but that's why you're in this group and not taking a Prozac pill.
Yeah. But I'd love to. I'd actually like to read some 20th centuries authors like Foucault, and even why not some of the Marxists. Just to, it gives you like a good reference, just a good insight. But yeah.
Yeah, but if I think that if we need to read someone oligarchical, I think that there are two who are very interesting. Friedrich Nietzsche, especially because he was especially brilliant, and so his text is well written, okay?
Mm.
Or Bertrand Russell himself, okay? Let's go to the master of the devils. If you want to taste something and not to the minor students.
Mm. But for some, what's weird is that I always had even though that I have an affinity for, let's say, Platonic teachings, the Saint Augustine, the writings of Saint Augustine, and I also, like, I hold there is a big contradiction, but for some reason I see in Nietzsche a lot of, there's something truly powerful in Nietzsche. There's something alluring in Nietzsche.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you remember the metaphor of the camel, the lion, and the chine? Do you remember that metaphor?
In which book? Because I only read.
Anzo Sprach Zarathustra.
Oh, I actually didn't. I read. I only read the Gay Science, and as well as the Tragedy, and the book, his book on tragedy, which
Twilight of the Idols.
Sorry.
Twilight of the Idols.
No, his book on tragedy, where he elaborates on the idea of
the Birth of Tragedy.
Yeah, Birth of Tragedy.
Mm. But he still had his mind when he wrote the Birth of Tragedy.
Yeah.
Because it's an excellent book on Greek tragedy and the origin of Greek tragedy.
Yeah, yeah.
And anyway, I come back to the metaphor of the camel, of the lion, and of the chine. Okay, because he asked the good questions. Okay, because the camel is the man of tradition that is completely crushed by the teachings of others. Okay, he's a beast of burden. And the lion is precisely the man that is revolting against the tradition that he doesn't understand. And the chine is precisely the man that has been capable to return to the source of agape, to that deep joy connected to creation, understanding, and discovery, which is symbolized by the chine, okay? But according to me, even if he was capable to ask the good questions, for complex reasons, he was not capable to return precisely to the source and to be the chine. He ended up by being a mad lion.
Mm. Very interesting. You told me that was in Zarathustra, right?
Yeah, and those Zarathustra, yes.
This is fun. What I would suggest for tonight, I think that yeah, I think that our reading will probably cap off, unless, do you guys want to do one more? Do you want to do 16, or do you want to end it here at 15 and pick it up again next Wednesday?
For some reason, to tell you the truth, Matt, like I'd like to personally, like before coming into these readings, I would like to read them myself, take notes,
Yeah,
and then come into these readings.
absolutely, dude. No, I thought actually you had gotten this text. No, for sure, yeah, and you can easily access this this text online. It's on the Rising Tide site, right up front. And yeah, it's definitely something to also come back to. I've read this now multiple times, and I'm always getting new insights out of it every single time I revisit it. So there's, yeah, it's not something like, it's not your typical text that you could just say you read and then move on. But this whole,
Matt, don't forget to send him the article by Michael Kurtz.
I just did that, way ahead of you.
Oh,
yep.
Cool.
No, so I think that for tonight we could just phase it out into a little casual discussion, but we'll stop the recording here. For anybody online, we'll pick it up on section 16 next week, and we'll try to get through probably a good 10 sections. But obviously, this is so dense that we have to stop and talk throughout the course of this thing. But again, the question of intention and geopolitics is always so important to hold a serious study of universal history, the way Schiller lays it out in his universal history lectures, in mind, because universal history requires a discovery of geopolitical operations from ancient times into the present as one continuous process, which has discrete manifestations. And then that gives you a context to sort of hold in mind when you're looking at the rise and popularization of certain sets of ideas and the destruction or undermining of other sets of ideas. So there's this reciprocal nature of mind and action that shapes all of history. And if we just get at this from theories of ideas that don't have bearing upon universal history, it doesn't give us a full, toolkit to work with. So definitely the Michael Kirsch thing is really, really useful. It's a
yeah, this is original source, and original source, it's important to read or refer to, but the Michael Kirsch article flows, because it's relevant to the, it's closer, shall we put it that way, to the city of London and the Venetian question and all that, the whole politics that operates around the current events today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, because there are, and I got to read that Jacques Attali book. He's such a creepy figure. I really.
No. I would like so much that you and Ryan and everyone in the group read the book, because it's a 700-page book, and after that we can have a 3 hours Zoom conference on that, dismantling the book in the light of the Michael Kurtz article and other knowledge that we have, and dissecting the oligarchical process and how it creates mental weapons in order to brainwash people. Because as you said, Matthew, Bertrand Russell is considered the authoritative figure nowadays concerning Leibniz. That is a tremendous victory. If Russell is considered as the expert on Leibniz, how can you brainwash more people than that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when most people talk about Leibniz or even Plato, they're not actually talking about Leibniz or Plato. They're talking about Bertrand Russell's definition and interpretation of Leibniz and Plato, which creates these straw men. Or even like cybernetics, right? Or you look at a lot of the theories that are dominant today that, oh my God, like I was just, I'm preparing an article right now on creative destruction and Joseph Schumpeter. And if you look at what he was a part of politically and not just treat him like an ivory tower theoretician or mathematician, but you really look at the power structures and relationships that he was directly a part of, you start seeing that there were real artificial agendas to crush more potent sets of ideas of political economy that were arising around that time of the 1940s, 50s, 60s. And it influences so many people, like the Federal Reserve Chair, Chair Ben Bernanke, the former one, and Janet Yellen, and Paul Volcker, who talked about the creative disintegration of the U.S. Economy back in the 1970s. It's so pervasive and so destructive, and it really is a subversion of the ideas of Charles de Gaulle and John F. Kennedy, who had a very different idea of how creativity happens. Less destruction, more creativity.
That creative disintegration.
I should have said creative, and I meant controlled disintegration. Sorry, not creative disintegration.
Was it controlled?
Yeah, cool.
Controlled disintegration.
It was something disintegration. What was it?
It was in response to the inflation of the 1970s caused by the oil shocks, which was causing mass inflation to like 12% in the 1970s. And Volcker, who was a Trilateral Commission figure working with Zbigniew Brzezinski, gave a speech in London in Warwick University where he said that the controlled disintegration of the world economy is a desirable outcome for the 1980s. And he did it in the form of his 2 years of 20% interest rate hikes and demands of increased capital reserves for commercial banks and a whole bunch of other things, destruction of protectionism and parity pricing in the 1980s.
Yeah, I read, excuse me, Matt, I read your article on that. What I'm thinking of is I thought I'd seen it someplace else. Somebody else used the same phrase, and whether it was the former Prime Minister of Britain, what was it? Was it a Brown? One of them was
Blair, Brown,
Brown, yeah. What had used that same phrase. What I'm getting at is if it's used by more than just Volcker, and if it originated with Brzezinski, whatever, it shows a pattern of collusion somehow,
Yeah, it does. Well, if you look at what they're all a part of, and their less popular works definitely showcase their intention for what they think a healthy society should be and what has to be destroyed for that healthy society to be brought into being. They're all very much in alignment, whether it's Kissinger talking about the post-Westphalian age and eliminating nation states and the belief in nationalism from the minds of men, or Blair saying the same thing, or, they're all sort of moving in the same orientation. So is the G. Brock Chisholm, right? The founder of the World Health Organization back in 1948. He's saying the exact same thing, that human beings need to be cured of their belief in family, faith in family, nationalism, and religious creeds has to be broken to bring about a healthy society free of neurosis. And that's the founder of the Tavistockian founder of the World Health Organization in the 40s. Like, it's these guys are sick. And I mean, I think that the interesting thing when you look at a lot of their writings and look at what they do, they're really projecting their own inner sickness onto the world that they wish to manipulate and make in their own image. Same thing for Julian Huxley creating UNESCO and saying that we need to bring eugenics back into popularity and give it a new name. He's a misanthropic. He doesn't like human beings, but he's trying to control the mechanisms of society that shape the aesthetical values and how we think of human beings. Or Bertrand Russell talking about Leibniz.
Yeah, I would like to introduce something down to earth and practical, with your permission. Okay, and I would like to use the symbol of the I Ching. Okay, because the hexagram is formed by 6 lines, okay? Line 1, 2, 3 forms an unity, and lines 4, 5, 6 form the upper unity. The upper unity 4, 5, 6 corresponds to the eternal values of beauty, goodness, and truth, okay? And when I said that certain group in the last 2-3 centuries have been more efficient in organizing violence, I say that with respect, okay? Because since we are a creature of flesh and bones, after all, the capability to organize violence, either inner violence or outer violence, is a talent and tend to be neglected by people having a tendency to live in the upper realm of human reality, okay? Beauty, goodness, and truth. And 1, 2, 3 corresponds to vitality, which is a good quality. Vitality is not bad. 2 corresponds to learning, but rather on the level of technical learning or learning a trade. And 3 correspond to the intellect in terms of organization, precisely, okay? And those are also eternal values, okay? Vitality, learning, and organization, collective organization. And I would say that I thought we discussed in one of our past sessions that the people who scare the oligarchs, but truly scare them, that the people who are capable of being at the same time creative, being in the 4, 5, 6 levels according to the hexagram, but at the same time they are capable of practical action in the level 1, 2, 3, okay? Because if you don't have those 2 dimensions that I call 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6 together, political action most of the time don't give anything real or transmissible to future generation, if you want.
But then I'm just gonna somehow shift the subject. Has any one of you read Henri Bergson?
Yes, of course.
Oh, really? Okay. Because I started his book, but for some reason I had his book. I started it, but I didn't complete it. So, do you mind? I'm very interested in his idea, because he develops. He does not somehow negate the Darwinian approach of evolution, but he supplements it, if I understand.
Yes, a besoin de surplus d'âme, as he said.
Yeah.
And I think that precisely that's what I said with the 2 group of symbols of the I Ching. The Darwinian dimension is 1, 2, 3, et le surplus d'âme, I said, the Henri Bergson, or we need to add the soul, okay? Clumsy translation. Because in French, un surplus d'âme is much better, but we need to add the second floor, okay? The 3, 4, the 4, 5, 6, beauty, goodness, and truth. And he was he was on the path of that.
Okay.
Have you read Teilhard de Chardin?
Yes,
Ryan or
Teilhard de Chardin was
you guys read?
more,
Huh?
yeah, but as you know, Matthew, Teilhard de Chardin was an oligarchical operative disguising himself as a philosopher.
I guess, yeah. My question though is, do you think that Bergson has more in common with Chardin or more in common with like Leibniz?
I think that Bergson is more a seeker of truth. Okay. I don't know if he consciously categorized himself with Leibniz or not. That I don't know. But I read enough of him to qualify him, as a seeker of truth.
Okay.
That was perfectly aware that once again, okay, we are creature of flesh and bone. Okay, we cannot cannot reject of ourselves. Okay, that's why I said that I'm very respectful of the capability of Westerners to organize violence. And I suggest to all other nations that complain to be oppressed by Westerners to organize themselves and be capable of organized violence instead of complaining. That's my practical advice. However, we are also people that want to go to beauty, goodness, and truth. So we have to take into account our flesh and bone dimension, and we have to take into account our heavenly dimensions.
Yeah. Matthew, can you, so Chardin, what's his first name?
Pierre Teilhard.
Yeah, okay. And what's
Well,
his background?
sorry.
What?
What's his background?
Anthropology and paleontology.
Which century? Yeah, I've never heard of him.
19, beginning of the 20th.
Okay.
But very much spirituality too, right? When I say anthropology, he was a priest of the Catholic Church.
Well, he was a Jesuit priest, more
It's
specifically.
very interesting. Also, Bergson. So Bergson is Jewish, I believe. But
Who? Bergson? Yes, Bergson.
Yeah.
Yes.
But towards the end of
Gaul's mentor,
Who?
Bergson, didn't he have some association with de Gaulle as a teacher or as somebody who he referred to very often? I thought it was, yeah.
I'm not aware, but what I'm aware in regards to. Okay, bye, Gerald. In regards to Bergson, I think like towards the end of his life, so I think he died in right after the occupation, when Hitler entered Paris. So he died like a year later. I don't know if it was in 1940 or 1941, maybe a year after the occupation. Anyways, towards the end of his life, he had a strong urge he wanted to convert to Christianity, more precisely to Catholicism, but just as a sign of rebellion, when the Germans entered Paris, when the Germans occupied France, he just, as a sign of rebellion, he said, you know, I'm gonna stick to my Jewish heritage.
Yeah.
Just a piece of information.
And why do you think it's something important in the context of our discussion?
But what was important was why did he want to convert to Christianity, and specifically the Catholic faith?
Well, maybe it's because I have to admit I don't have the answer for that, but I want to answer because I want to keep on that very interesting conversation. Maybe because he found in some Christian text the answer or the partial answer to his quest to un surplus d'âme, un supplément d'âme, because the exact expression he used was un supplément d'âme. Okay, or to use my vocabulary, he was perfectly aware that we are creature of flesh and bones, but he realized that during his time, people were not giving enough importance to the dimension of beauty, goodness, and truth precisely. And maybe he found in Christian text some answers to his quest, maybe.
Yeah. But in the and when you repeat beauty, goodness, and truth, what do you think is the relation between those three entities?
Oh yes, yes. And I make a little bit advertisement for our group. We discussed that in detail in the second or third session of the discussion on In Defense of Common Sense by Lyndon LaRouche, the American economist famous for his defense of the American system of economy. And And we realized that that book by him was his own expression to resolve the paradox by Parmenides, the Parmenides paradox between the flux of phenomena and the eternal reality of being, precisely.
Yeah.
And I gave a little speech on that at the end. So just to make an advertisement for our group and for my little self.
Yeah, I should probably put that in the as a link in the description box of this video since I'm still recording it. So, yeah, exactly.
Flux of phenomena and something else.
Being.
I didn't catch.
Being, and the eternity of being.
Yeah. The state of ontology of the existences that have intrinsic existence that don't change, and how they relate, how that state relates to, which is what Leibniz was discussing in that document in the last section, how the sovereign entities that exist relate to and are necessary to hold in mind when evaluating and processing what the sense perception that we're born with gives us access to, which is the world of flux. And how do we make sense of that? So how do we jump from one to the other? How do we go from bottom up to top down, and from top down to bottom up, and more? So how do you have that flexibility and then more, not just be limited to that either? So.
Exactly. Again, it's the same problem. Okay, it's always the same.
Enthusiasm, agape enthusiasm. I know what you're gonna say.
Yeah, no,
Totally
yes.
true. I totally agree.
Well, I was starting with the foundation. I was always saying it's always the fact that we are in flesh and bone, but we're not only in flesh and bone. Okay, yeah. So you have to deal with the two.
Yeah, yeah.
After all, it's in ourselves, the human beings, that is the biggest battle of the universe. Okay, the biggest fight of the universe. It's inside us. Okay, I would say that it's a game probably of the universe. I don't think that we're the only intelligent species in the universe, but I think that the universe probably produce all kinds of intelligent species, so that dialectics, that battle of light and darkness, play within those intelligent species. And when those intelligent species are capable to solve that problem between 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, okay, that would be the final extraordinary fireworks of the end of the universe, but not in a bad sense, but of the final accomplishment of the universe.
It's an interesting philosophy, dude.
And you know, Aristotle, he invented a very nice word for that. Okay, because the guy was not entirely stupid. Okay, he invented the word ontelesia. Okay,
ontelesia, yeah, right.
And he was not entirely bad after all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But there's something also just so pure and so beautiful about optimism in of itself has something. You can also see it. Let's say if you take Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, towards the end you have this passage where you have like all these. It's like a continual struggle. Then finally you have this massive burst of optimism that comes out of joy and optimism that erupts. I don't know what the role of optimism and joy plays in the philosophy of the classical tradition. So maybe we could talk about that a bit.
Yeah. Do you like classical music, Eastern or Western?
Oh, the classical music is the only thing I listen to, especially Bach. Bach is my number one.
Okay. When I was a teenager, I always said as a joke to my friends, and when I was a teenager, I was posturing as that I am an atheist and so on. Okay, but I has never truly been an atheist. But you know, when you're young and teenager, it has been very fashionable to be atheist. And but when you listen to Bach, after an hour of Bach, you believe in God. okay, because the amount of agape is increasing automatically when you to Bach.
With most Baroque music, I find, yeah. Vivaldi also.
Yeah, exactly.
Specifically Bach, there's something about Bach that is, I don't know, like it's undescribable. Like it's purity. It's pure. The purity is the word that describes it. Beethoven has this. I mean, has a lot of will, has a lot of energy. There's a lot of earthliness in Beethoven. This earthliness that struggles to get out of its this you know, a spirit that struggles with earthliness. Bach is just you're floating in purity. See, it's the pure form.
Bach is divine. Okay,
it's divine.
It's
divinity.
And I agree with you. There's something of the divine and of the earth in Beethoven and in Mozart also. But Bach is truly divine, and there's no other words.
What I remember reading once was an excerpt from a letter that Bach wrote. I don't know whether it was to one of his kids or another family relation, but in it, he was describing, because he had to produce a lot, right? He, like, literally every Sunday he produced a masterpiece or two for church service as the organist and composer for a number of churches. And each time he wrote a composition, he saw it as a prayer to God. Like that's literally how he saw his creations of music, is his way of honoring God. And it was a really joyful experience. And in his family, he had like 20 kids or something, like huge, but it was a very musical household. And you heard descriptions of like these kids improvising at like family events every evening. And just like, you can imagine the type of joy that I don't have an
his wife wrapped fish in his music. And supposedly some of his works were lost because his wife wrapped fish, and I don't know, in the music, but I don't know if that's true. It may be an apocryphal story.
No, I heard that after he died, his music really wasn't played, and even though his students, like two of his kids who became pretty well-known composers, they for whatever reason didn't really do much to popularize their father's music, and a lot of his music was lost and still is. Some of it was found. There was like a project in the 1780s or 1770s run by Moses Mendelssohn, and later on Felix Mendelssohn, his son, in the 1800s, is working with a network to try to track down Bach's music. And yeah, they find it, it's like packaging cheese that was sitting, aging for like 30, 40 years. They find his music wrapping cheese, and they're like, wow, we found it. Like, what a treasure hunt.
There's his wife involved again.
I don't know. Yeah.
He's a fish.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
You guys have like some good suggestions for like articles or books for architecture? Because I'm writing a piece on architecture. Like I need some substance to revise to.
I'm sure Kwan does.
Well, do you know the Roman Vitruve? I say it in French, but I don't know how. Vitruve, Vitruve. In English, I suppose it's Vitruvius or something like that.
Okay.
Leonardo da Vinci. Sinan, S-I-N-A-N, who was the architect of the Ottoman Empire in the 16th century.
Okay. What happened in the 16th century in the Ottoman Empire? Like they gave, it's also, there's something very interesting in terms of.
Ryan, just quick, your questions are so fruitful, and the the seeds of so many good fruitful conversations, but I have to wake up at like 5:30 in the morning tomorrow, so I do have to begin to part ways with you guys. I'm sorry. Just quick, on that note, there's somebody I'm going to email you, Ryan, an architect, a current living architect named Nikos Selingaros. Yes. He's got a website, and it's a fantastic website. He's a friend of mine, who's done a lot of work on the Golden Section, and classical aesthetics, but applied to modern times. Really interesting fellow. Written a lot of material.
Okay, Nikos, last name Silinga. How do you spell it?
Salingaros. So it's Nikos, Nikos.
Yeah.
Salin, Salingaros.
Okay. Cool.
And before I forget, Ryan, there's one concept in architecture that you have to see: arcology. Arcology. I forgot the name of the guy who is a Brazilian or Latin American, but he invented the concept of arcology, Arcology, which is a combination of architecture, ecology, and all kind of very interesting things.
Sorry, arcology. So Arcolioi.
Logy. Logy.
Logy.
Good night, guys.
Good night, Bob.
Ecology. Sorry.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Yes, what's 1L? 1L.
Just got that in time.